Hey guys, so we are now starting our new unit on social psychology. This is typically the last unit that is covered in the psych course, but we moved it up for, I think, what will be obvious reasons as we go. Plus, the fact that I didn't get to teach it last year means that I've been itching to talk about social psychology. Um, so let's just dive right into the notes. So first, your book and all social psychology really needs to start with attribution theory. So attribution theory basically says that when we look at other people or ourselves, we assign kind of an internal or an external uh, view as to why those behaviors are occurring. Okay, so an internal view would be like that person is a bad person. Or an external view would be like, oh man, that's a really crappy situation that I was put in. Um, that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about attribution theory. So when we look at other people, we usually assign their behaviors into one of those camps. Like we try to explain, why are they acting that way? Oh, it must be because either the situation they're in or because it's the type of person that they are. Which leads us to the fundamental attribution error. Okay, the fundamental attribution error is the idea that for others, we tend to put the emphasis on internal disposition, so a shot at their character, who they are as a person, and downplay the external situations um, that they might be involved in. So, for example, if we're talking about you're walking down the street and you see a homeless person, um, most people will not, well, if you fall trapped to the fundamental attribution error, you don't see that person as a victim of circumstances that might have been out of their control. Maybe they lost their job due to downsizing. They couldn't pay their mortgage. Their bank foreclosed, and now they have nowhere to live. All things that are kind of outside of someone's control. We people falling at people falling under the fundamental attribution error will say, "Oh, that person's lazy. Oh, that person needs to get a job. Oh, they're probably, just a bum or whatever, and they can't do anything. They just needed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and change their circumstances." Um, Notice that when we talk about for us, which is another type of attribution error, it's not the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error, again, is when we overplay internal dispositions and downplay external dispositions in others. For us, we almost always say that our actions are because of our environment, but the other people, it is almost always that it is their internal disposition, right? It is their who they are as a person. And this causes us to disregard the truth of a situation, and it also causes us to struggle to explain other people's actions. Um, like I just said about the foreclosure thing, someone could have lost their job. It could have been something outside of their own. Maybe they had to take care of a ailing parent or a family member, which meant that they couldn't work anymore. You can see how this can very easily explain some people's behaviors if we just kind of take like a 10,000-foot view, right? Just kind of zoom back and see all of the circumstances that are affecting people's lives. Um, it's really hard to do that in the moment. We easily fall prey to that, and we'll be doing something in class that will kind of highlight what that is, or that we do that. Even if we know that we're going to do it, we still do it. The other attribution errors that I mentioned, the actor observer, is so that's an internal for others, external for self. So, someone's. I think the example I use that I use in class is someone's driving behind you, or 95, someone's going slow in the fast lane, right? They must be a horrible person. Don't they know, what are they, an idiot, whatever. But when you're driving slow in the fast lane, oh, I'm being cautious. Oh, there's so much traffic. Oh, there's other things involved, right? That explains your behavior. And the self-serving bias is the internal for your own successes, but external for your failures. So you do well on a test, it's because you studied hard. You fail a test, it's because the test was impossible and the teacher sucks at teaching. So attribution errors are all around us. There's many different types. There's also dispositional attributions, where we attribute things to people's instead of about who they are, but maybe information, right? We look at things in different ways depending on the circumstances. This ties pretty easily into the relationship between attitudes and actions. So we know that our attitudes affect actions and our actions affect our attitudes. That is easily shown in the foot in the door phenomenon. I think your book mentions that during when people were captured by prisoners of war during both the Korean and the Vietnam War, soldiers were asked to do very simple favors in exchange for a little bit of freedoms. Um, go get groceries or run this letter over to the mailbox or whatever. Um, as they started helping, those little small kind of requests made it easier for them to agree to larger requests. And as the kind of brainwashing and things kind of kicked in, some soldiers decided to stay, um, and basically join like the Vietnamese Communist Party, even though that they had, they signed up to go fight them during the war. That these small requests slowly build into something larger. So it's called the foot in the door phenomenon. Um, this is actually a interesting negotiating tactic. You can think about by asking for something small, and then once someone is saying yes or agrees to it, they are more likely to continue to say yes as the things increase. So, maybe if you're looking for, I don't know, a later curfew, right? Maybe instead of saying, hey, can I go from a 10 o'clock curfew to a 1 o'clock curfew? Maybe you say, can I go from a 10 to a 10:15? And then 10:15 to 10:30, and then 10:30 to 11, and then 11 to 12. Like once they start saying yes, it's easier to accept. There's actually the opposite of this is actually called the door in the face phenomenon. And that actually works too when you're with negotiating. So you can think of it, door in the face basically being that you start off with something that is so outrageous that it'll make whatever your next offer is seem reasonable. So let's say that you're talking about curfew, or let's say that you're asking for a raise. You have a job and you're asking for a raise. Let's say you currently make $10 an hour, and you go in and you say, all right, I think I'm ready for a raise. Your boss says, fine, how much do you think? And you say $25 an hour. Your boss will laugh at you. You'll say, all right, fine, how about 15? And the boss, suddenly 15 seems very reasonable. Your boss might not have been prepared to offer you 15, but because you set the expectations high to start, they are more likely to come up to where you are. You can see this with negotiating car prices. Cars are usually set a little bit more than they're valued for, and you can kind of negotiate down. Right? Why is that the case? Because they want to they'll get more money from you than if they showed you what the cheapest price was and tried to upsell you. So we see this every day. Again, foot in the door is you start small and get bigger. Door in the face is you start big and then narrow it down to what you actually wanted. We do know that doing becomes believing, right? We saw that in the Stanford prison study with Phil Zimbardo, that the roles that we play slowly become our actual attitudes, that we believe those attitudes if we play the role. It's why people, when they're, they move or they travel, that expands their, minds, that they think things in different perspectives, right? It's because our attitudes are affected by our actions. So when is what we can call attitude consistent behavior most likely? So if I believe that something is wrong, when am I most likely to behave that way? So one is if the attitude is perceived as important. If it's something that is seen as fundamental to who the person is, they're more likely to follow it. If it's consistent with a subjective norm in society, so is it something that fits in with the larger group, or is it an outlier? Right? Is it rare? If you have control over it, or at least even perceived control over making the decision, you are more likely to follow that behavior. And if you have direct experience with the norm related to that attitude, so you believe something. Let's say it's religious, right? You believe in Catholicism, and you're going to church, and you have experience with that attitude norm and what that means. Now, the interesting thing is how we form attitudes. That's something that we'll actually talk a little bit later, that there's this thing called the mere exposure effect, that just basically now. We'll get more into detail later, but the more likely you encounter something, the more likely you are to like it as time goes on. We'll talk more about that later because it plays a role in pro-social behavior. Okay, what happens if your behaviors don't match with your attitudes? That's what we call cognitive dissonance. This is a state of distress that's caused by a discrepancy between your behaviors and your attitudes. So essentially, in plain English, you're doing something that you don't think is the right thing to do, or you're doing something you don't believe in. Um, for us in the West, it's usually based off of personal beliefs. So if I think that, what's a good example? If I think that, if I think that eating, if I think that animals deserve to be treated well, maybe I'm a member of the Humane Society, maybe I've donated to animal shelters or whatever. Um, Maybe my attitude that animals should be treated well causes cognitive dissonance with the fact that I, eat meat or something like that. So that causes an internal stress reaction, according to Festinger. And what eventually happens is we would like to say that because our beliefs are important to us, that would change our attitudes, and change our actions. But instead, uh, in order to make us feel better, we don't stop our behavior. We actually change our attitudes. So you'll see a lot of people who work in animal welfare organizations who aren't vegetarian, right? That they are eating animal flesh, for lack of a, sorry for graphicness, but they're eating animals while also saying that, you need to care for animals and treat them humanely. Um, so there's a cognitive dissonance there, but it's easier for people to change their attitudes than it is for them to change their behavior. Behavior change is really hard. So if you want to find a way to change someone's feelings and attitudes towards something, you need to change their behavior. And there's the movie that I've mentioned in class uh, with Justin Timberlake and Mila Kunis, right? Or Ashton Kutcher and whoever the other person is. That there is, basically the movie is they start out as best friends. They decide to engage in some romantic behavior because they were having a hard time finding a boyfriend and girlfriend, and that eventually led to one of them, or both of them developing feelings for each other. So if you want to change the way that you think about something, then all you need to do is change your behavior, because your behavior drives your attitude changes. That'll be it for this video. We'll be coming back with the next one on social influence and why being around other people changes the way that we behave. All right, guys. Until then, see you later.